Grade 12, I want to just go over the menstrual cycle, what happens in terms of the hormones, as well as how those hormones affect what happens in the ovaries, as well as in the lining of the endometrium inside the uterus. Okay, so this is my little summary, and you can find it on Moodle as well. And I'm going to use different colors to try and make it a little bit simpler to understand, because it does get a little bit confusing. So at the graph, in the graph at the top here, you can see that it talks about the different hormone levels, and we've got LH, FSH, estrogen, and progesterone. Then what happens inside the ovary, so the ovarian cycle, and then what happens inside the uterus, so the uterine cycle. All right, and I've made a nice little summary at the bottom over here. Okay, so let me just move this up a little bit. All right, so let's have a look. So we're going to start at the beginning with what the pituitary does. So remember, the pituitary gland, there's the brain, all right? The base of the brain is known as the hypothalamus, and the little bilobed pituitary is at the base of the brain, and it secretes, FSH and LH, as well as growth hormone, etc. Okay, so if we look here, all right, the pituitary gland, the hypophysis, which you don't really need to know, it secretes FSH. So I'm going to color that in blue. So there's FSH, and you can see how that level rises in the blood, and that's going to stimulate some of the follicles to start developing. They mature inside the ovaries. So usually a couple of follicles mature, but then only one becomes a mature Graafian follicle when, and then ovulation takes place. All right, now, if we look here, it says, number 2, the wall of the follicle. Okay, the wall of that follicle acts as an endocrine gland. So remember, endocrine means that it produces hormones which then are transported by the blood. So the wall of that follicle secretes these pens are not really great. Okay, secretes estrogen, and you can see here that the level of estrogen starts increasing in the blood. Okay. And that causes the uterine lining, and that is known as the endometrium, okay, becomes thicker. Now, the endometrium isn't as thick as this. It's only a few millimeters, so it probably thickens by about 4 millimeters each month. All right, so the estrogen causes the uterine lining, or the endometrium, to repair itself, because remember, over here is when menstruation occurred, when the old lining was sloughed off or broken, it breaks away, and then the menstrual flow of blood occurs. All right, now over here, number 3, a peak in estrogen is positive feedback. Now, you don't really need to know about positive feedback. It's positive feedback on the pituitary gland, all right? And now the pituitary gland is also going to secrete LH. There were low levels of LH, or luteinizing hormone, so now there's a surge in LH, or luteinizing hormone, okay? There's a surge in LH. What does LH do? L for ovulation, L, okay? LH causes ovulation. So in other words, this follicle moved to the edge of the ovary, and it bursts open, and then the developing egg is released, and that is the moment of ovulation. The Graafian follicle moves to the edge of the ovary, bursts, and the developing egg or ovum is released. And remember, it's going to be drawn by the beating little fimbriae at the end of the fallopian tubes down into the fallopian tubes. All right, so what happens now? Well, the remains of the Graafian follicle, so that's the Graafian follicle, the remains of it stays behind in the ovary, and it becomes a glandular body called the corpus luteum. Body, corpus, corpse, luteum means yellow in Latin. So that structure remains in the ovary, and it's known as the corpus luteum. So what does it do? It secretes a hormone called progesterone. All right, increasing progesterone. Okay, let's try and do that in another color. Okay, so I'm going to do it in pink. So increasing progesterone helps to maintain the endometrium together with estrogen. Because if you look here now, there were low levels of progesterone, so now the level of progesterone increases, up to there. And you can see here that the level of estrogen, there's still estrogen, but it's now lower. So together those two hormones help to mature the endometrial lining, and progesterone is the one that causes mucus glands and that to develop in the endometrial layer and nutrients in case there's a developing embryo to implant. Alright, so estrogen helps to maintain that endometrium, and together with estrogen, so now there's negative feedback. So negative feedback means when there's high of something, it's going to cause low of something else. So there is negative feedback on, let's just draw that here, on the pituitary. There is negative feedback on the pituitary to secrete, less LH and FSH. So I'm just going to color that in. So that's LH, alright, and FSH we were doing in blue, alright, and now you can see that the level of FSH is lower. Now that should make sense because these hormones, progesterone and estrogen, are maintaining, especially progesterone, is maintaining the endometrium in case there's a possible pregnancy. LH and FSH can't be secreted at the same time because they will cause more follicles. Well, FSH will cause some more follicles to develop, and LH will cause ovulation. And you can't ovulate if you're already, if there's already an embryo to implant. So it's negative feedback. The high levels of these hormones in the blood act as negative feedback on the pituitary so that the levels of LH and FSH drop, alright, to secrete less FSH and LH. So you can't ovulate again now, Right. If there is no fertilization, then the level of progesterone and estrogen drops. Now let's go back here. The yellow body, the corpus luteum, secretes progesterone. If there is no fertilization, then that yellow body breaks down. When it breaks down, it secretes less progesterone and less estrogen. So that removes the negative feedback. So therefore, in the following month, the FSH level is going to increase again so that more follicles can develop in the ovary the following month, and eventually the level of LH will also increase to cause ovulation. Alright, so at the bottom over here, if there is no fertilization, the corpus luteum breaks down and secretes less progesterone and estrogen. So decreasing progesterone results in the uterine lining breakdown, because progesterone maintains that lining. If there isn't enough progesterone anymore, if the level of progesterone drops, then that lining breaks down, and that's the next menstruation. The breakdown of the lining, the menstrual flow. So in other words, that negative feedback is removed, and then the cycle repeats. However, if the person is pregnant, alright, the level of progesterone stays high because this yellow body remains, and the level of estrogen. So that's going to maintain the endometrial lining, and part of that, wherever the embryo implants, that will become the placenta, and this happens for 3 months. So for 3 months, the yellow body is going to secrete estrogen and progesterone, and thereafter the placenta takes over the role of secreting estrogen and progesterone. All right. So in some women, if there's not enough estrogen and progesterone being secreted by the corpus luteum, and then the placenta takes over the role, then sometimes they have a miscarriage, all right? Or they're put into hospital and they're given injections of progesterone to try and maintain the pregnancy. All right, so that's basically how it works. Okay, so you can see here now, not pregnant, the corpus luteum breaks down, progesterone and estrogen drop, therefore negative feedback removed. First, follicle stimulating hormone secretion by the pituitary gland is increased, so therefore follicles develop again. Then there's a surge in LH because the follicle will start secreting estrogen, and then ovulation occurs again. So you generally ovulate once a month, one from an egg from one ovary the 1 month, and then another egg from the alternate ovary in the next month. Okay, and I hope that helps. Like I said, you can find the summary on Moodle.